In the shadowy depths of history, one name stands alone. A chilling whisper of a blood-soaked legend, Elizabeth Bathory, a countess of unspeakable wealth and insatiable desires, held a secret so sinister, so shocking, it defies the very bounds of humanity. Prepare to journey into the abyss, where power, obsession, and cruelty collide in a tale that will haunt your nightmares, but maybe not in the way you imagine. Hello and welcome to the channel, where we explore true crime, false prophets, and pop culture. If you like this video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Let's dive in. Elizabeth Bathory was born into a world steeped in opulence and mystique on her family's estate, nestled in the heart of royal Hungary. The year was August 7th, 1560. The Countess grew up within the magnificent walls of Eszed Castle, where her every desire was granted, ideally before she could speak it. Her powerful family had ruled as Grand Dukes, Viceroys, Judges, and regional princes. Her uncle Stephen, her mother's brother, ruled as King of Poland from 1576 to 1586. As a Protestant Calvinist, her family believed in education for women, and Elizabeth received a lavish education, learning Greek, German, Slovak, Hungarian, and Latin from an early age. Her privileged life, however, was marred by debilitating migraines, violent mood swings, and epileptic seizures. Epilepsy, referred to at the time as the falling evil, was widely believed to be the work of malevolent demons. Treatment could be macabre and include rubbing human blood on the affected's lips or administering an elixir of blood and bone. As we will see, torment and privilege interweave in Elizabeth's life, creating a lust for control and power. By the tender age of 11, Elizabeth was betrothed to Count Ferenc of the illustrious Nadasti family. But the question remained, could this young nobleman stomach the secrets of the woman Elizabeth was destined to become? The Countess's exposure to bloody spectacles started at an early age. She grew up in a world of extreme brutality. Servants endured relentless, creatively devised punishments, routinely suffering horrific treatment for even the slightest missteps. The ruling classes unleashed their savagery upon their serfs and the lower classes largely unchecked, and criminals faced torture and execution as public spectacles. From her cocoon of privilege, young Elizabeth saw these horrors, but instead of recoiling, she reveled in them. One disturbing tale speaks of the 6-year-old Countess gleefully applauding as a man met his gruesome end, beaten and then sewn into the carcass of a horse and left to die. Conditioned for perversity, her unholy desires followed her into adolescence. At the age of 13, before her marriage, Bathory allegedly gave birth to a child sired by a handsome, lowly peasant boy. Her family swiftly dispatched the infant south to Wallachia with a trusted servant, and it was never seen again. The peasant boy was castrated and fed to ravenous wolves. If these accounts hold any truth, Bathory's upbringing perhaps sowed the seeds of a horrifyingly insatiable bloodlust and a taste for sadism that would rage for decades. At 15, Bathory married Count Ferenc. Although the marriage was political in nature, it turned out the two were very well matched. Shortly after they married, Ferenc became the chief commander of the Hungarian troops, leading them to war against the Ottoman Turks. The Count gained power and prestige on the battlefield, earning the nickname the Black Knight. The Ottoman Turks held a particular dread of him due to his treatment of prisoners, as he was reputed to relish beheading them and engaging in gruesome games with their severed heads. At times, he even issued orders for prisoners to be impaled on stakes, subjecting them to excruciatingly slow deaths reminiscent of the methods employed by Vlad the Impaler more than a century prior. Legend says that Ferenc schooled his wife in torture. Shielded by thick castle walls, he would restrain young girls who couldn't fight back for fear of their lives, lathering them in honey and tying them to trees to be ravished by insects. He showed his bride how to punish idleness by lighting pieces of paper soaked in oil between servants' toes until they would kick and scream wildly. He gifted his wife a pair of gloves spiked with claws that she could use to thrash her servants for their mistakes. This reportedly delighted Elizabeth. Together, the two compared their methods and perfected their dark art. And her husband wasn't her only conspirator. There are stories that Bathory's Aunt Clara introduced her to orgies and a shadowy circle of people considered to be sorcerers, witches, and alchemists. Another mysterious woman, Anna Darvoya, joined the household around this time and was rumored to be a witch. Anna would die of a stroke before facing a reckoning in court for her misdeeds. Elizabeth's other accomplices, like her children's nurse, Ilona Jo, her friend Dorka Zentz, and a young, disfigured teen nicknamed Fresco, would face the brutal justice of the day. As her circle of enablers and co-conspirators widened, Elizabeth's viciousness would grow and lead to even more unimaginable horror. Surprisingly, It was Ference's passing in 1604 when the Countess's most twisted desires surged to the forefront. At that time, she relocated to Czechiczki Castle, one of the bleakest and most Gothic castles in Europe. While her late husband was no stranger to barbarity, his main goal was to use fear and pain as a means of governance. But the Countess had different ambitions, and the stories from this time are truly chilling. It is reported that she tossed half-naked girls out into the snow, doused them with water, and watched as they froze to death while she was bundled warmly by a courtyard fire. She used needles to inflict pain, forcing them under the tender nail beds of her servants, saying, "If it hurts the horror, she can pull it out." If the girl was unwise enough to be tricked by this ruse, she would most certainly lose the finger. It is said that she even once sewed shut the mouth of a servant for speaking out of turn. But perhaps the most horrifying story describes how she sought to preserve her youth and beauty. In it, one of Elizabeth's servants is said to have accidentally pulled her hair while brushing it. According to legend, Elizabeth grabbed the brush and struck the young girl across the face so hard that she drew blood. That blood splashed onto the Countess's face and hands. Noticing that her skin looked more youthful after this, Elizabeth ordered the servant's throat slit, her blood drained, and a bath prepared so that Elizabeth could bathe in it. From here on out, this was her nightly ritual. The Countess and her murderous crew attempted to hide behind the cholera epidemic raging at the time, but the local morticians and clergy began to doubt that explanation as the bodies bore the brutal markings of torture. Eventually, they refused to provide funeral services for the Countess. Word began to spread in the nearby villages, and servants became harder to replace. As the legend goes, Bathory needed a new supply of young virginal women to satiate her growing appetites. The Countess opened her house as a gymnasium for young girls of lesser nobility. A gymnasium during this time was a space of higher education for women of status. A gymnasium run by someone of Elizabeth's stature would essentially be a female version of Harvard for the time. As a prominent aristocrat, Elizabeth was not only well-versed in the intricacies of courtly and social decorum, but also highly skilled at managing vast estates and overseeing extensive territories, a responsibility that often fell to her during her husband's extended wartime missions. These were skills young noble women looking to marry into powerful families coveted. Apparently, there were plenty of unsuspecting families from distant lands happy to send their daughters to Elizabeth's finishing school. Unfortunately, by this time, Elizabeth's insatiable desires had spiraled out of control, heralding the beginning of the end. It is said that the Countess and her sinister entourage grew increasingly bold in their depraved and bloody rituals. But it was when disposing of the bodies became an issue that they became reckless, resorting to tossing girls over the walls and banking that scavenging animals would hide the evidence. This twisted plan backfired when villagers stumbled upon the gruesome remains and raised the alarm. It was one thing to kill a serf, and another thing entirely to kill a member of the nobility. One minister went on record with his concerns and filed a complaint at the royal court in Vienna. Given the Bathory family's position in society, it was unusual for someone to speak out against them in such a public manner, which gave credence to the rumors that something was gravely wrong at the castle. Furthermore, in stark contrast to servant girls whose families had no means or connections to seek information about their missing daughters, the families of the young women enrolled in Elizabeth Gymnasium demanded answers when their daughters mysteriously vanished. As the anguish of these distraught high-status families grew, they leveraged their connections and applied directly to King Matthias II. In 1610, he took an unprecedented step and designated Jurd Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to spearhead a comprehensive investigation. Thurzo swiftly formed a dedicated team that painstakingly gathered over 300 witness statements. With shocking allegations of murder, torture, and even more sinister deeds, Thurzo and his team made an unannounced visit to Czechiczki Castle on New Year's Eve 1610 to confront the Countess. Their mission? To apprehend her and her servant accomplices. What they discovered when they arrived was nothing short of nightmarish. In a letter to his wife, the Palatine described finding the mutilated and lifeless body of one girl and discovering another left cruelly bound mid-session on a rack. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, the Countess entertained her holiday guest in high style. The connection between Thurzo and Elizabeth Bathory was strong as they were both part of the aristocracy. It is said that they knew each other well. This connection spared Elizabeth the public humiliation of a trial and incarceration, and it also set in motion a high-stakes negotiation between Thurzo and Elizabeth's family. The Bathory holdings teetered on the brink of being seized by the crown due to the shocking scandal. The Bathorys pushed hard for a solution that would safeguard their wealth. It was agreed that Elizabeth would be confined to house arrest within her castle under the king's guard rather than being sent to a nunnery, a fate more common for problematic female nobility at the time. The servants who once served and aided the Countess fared far worse. When the trial got underway in 1611, they turned on their former mistress and gave testimony on behalf of the crown, but it didn't save them. They faced prolonged torture before being put to death by the king's executioners. In particular, Ilona and Dorcas suffered unimaginable torments, having their fingers mercilessly torn off with red-hot pincers before being consumed by flames. Fisco was considered less culpable due to his youth and faced a less agonizing death by beheading. However, his body too was consigned to the fiery pyre alongside the remains of his friends. But how much of this story is true, and how much of it is the result of centuries of storytelling and the human tendency to embellish? Some of the elements are so outlandish as to be almost unbelievable, so let's break it down. While it is a matter of record that the courtroom was filled with gripping and gory details, including accusations of murder, depravity, and other foul deeds, very little hard proof was presented at trial. Testimony primarily rested on hearsay and rumors and lacked concrete documentation. For instance, one witness testified that Bathory recorded her victim count as 650 in her private diary, but the witness admitted she had never seen the book herself and had only heard about it as described by a court official. The diary was never produced, and the official never mentioned it in his own testimony. In addition, much of the most damning testimony was given under duress and would be considered illegally coerced in today's courts. Also, the story of the Countess bathing in blood didn't surface until 1729, when a Jesuit scholar, Laszlo Tarozzi, wrote a book about the Countess. This was at the height of a vampire panic that swept the region, causing terrified farmers, serfs, and even government officials to dig up graves and stake corpses. By the middle of the 18th century, Elizabeth Bathory's name was synonymous with bloodlust and vampirism. There's also the possibility that she was a target of a disinformation campaign. It is important to remember that Elizabeth's trial was held at a time of great political intrigue. The Bathory dynasty had ruled in Hungary for a century, playing the Ottoman Sultan off the Habsburg emperors to retain their independence. Elizabeth also had the current king in her debt, having loaned the monarch a large sum of money to finance the long war against the Ottoman Turks. Elizabeth wasn't shy about trying to collect. A scandal of this magnitude not only gave the crown an excuse to cancel the debt, but it effectively ended the powerful Bathory family as a credible threat to the advancing Habsburg Empire. Those close to her benefited as well, including her daughters and sons-in-law, who received their sizable inheritance in the aftermath of her arrest. However, it is unlikely that Bathory was entirely innocent, as the absence of anyone speaking on her behalf indicates. The testimony at her trial almost certainly contains grains of truth about her vicious treatment of the lower classes. While murder was technically illegal, the nobility often enjoyed immunity from consequences when it came to their treatment of the peasantry under their control. Perhaps accustomed to unchecked power, Elizabeth was unable to rein in her worst impulses when it came to the higher-ranking girls under her care. Additionally, cholera was a genuine threat at this time. It's plausible that some of her students died of the disease and that their grieving families blamed Elizabeth for not taking better care of their daughters and were willing to believe the worst. So the question remains, was Elizabeth Bathory really a sadistic, bloodthirsty monster with a body count of hundreds? Or was she a woman who overplayed her hand in a turbulent world of political intrigue and high-stakes gamemanship? Was she an inconvenient, even intolerable obstacle to the powerful Habsburg king? A king, it should be noted, that became a Holy Roman Emperor a year after Elizabeth's trial? And who was she to her family? No longer beautiful, no longer fertile, unwilling to relinquish the privilege she felt entitled to. Did she deserve her arrest and confinement as punishment for her past deeds? Or was she a scapegoat, sacrificed to ensure the status quo could live on? If we take a step back, perhaps the most chilling part of this story is how easily we as humans justify our own worst behaviors that are shaped by our own history and the forces around us, especially when we are shielded by the advantages of wealth and privilege. So how much of Elizabeth's story do you believe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for sticking around. Leave a comment with a black heart emoji and we'll be sure to respond. Until next time, take care of each other, love yourself, love your neighbor. Bye for now.